Before we begin, I want to know from you, where are you watching from? Write in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any mystery and horror stories. The biting wind cut through the cracks of the old Greystone residence, an isolated mansion on the outskirts of New Orleans, its wood creaking as if protesting decades of neglect. The 8 victims had met only by chance, drawn by a seemingly harmless opportunity, an urban challenge that promised a night of mysteries and secrets in the legendary house. None of them could have imagined that this choice would lead them to such a tragic fate. The mansion was a presence unto itself, its walls covered in moss and its darkened windows like silent, watching eyes. Right at the entrance, the feeling of unease was palpable. Doors closed on their own, shadows seemed to move where no light reached. For some, curiosity outweighed fear. For others, an unsettling premonition made each step heavy. Among the 8 were Claire, a young journalist searching for a career-changing story; Marcus, an architecture student fascinated by old buildings; Heather, a local history teacher; Damien, an investigator of paranormal phenomena; and the remaining 5, united only by the promise of adventure and financial reward. They all had something in common, a tendency to underestimate the unknown. The first few minutes inside the mansion were relatively quiet, only the sound of footsteps echoing through the immense corridors. But something seemed different, almost imperceptible. The air had a metallic smell, as if reminiscent of old blood. Claire, ever alert, noticed a series of old paintings that seemed to shift slightly, even though no one had touched them. A chill ran down her spine. The group decided to explore the rooms on the upper floor, where local reports indicated strange apparitions had been seen. Marcus pointed to a side staircase that seemed less damaged, suggesting it would be the safest way. As they climbed, each step creaked intensely, and Heather began to feel a sense of déjà vu, as if she had been there before, but couldn't remember when. Meanwhile, Damien analyzed every detail: marks on the floor, doors closing with non-existent wind, and a faint whisper that seemed to come from the walls. He mentally recorded everything, with the gaze of someone searching for evidence of something that cannot be explained by logic. The atmosphere grew more tense with each passing moment. One of the rooms in the hallway contained furniture covered in white sheets, and shadows cast by flickering candles danced on the walls, seemingly moving on their own. It was then that they heard the first scream, a muffled sound, coming from the end of the hallway that made everyone freeze. What began as a game of curiosity quickly transformed into palpable fear. Claire and Marcus ran toward the sound, but they were too late. The room was empty except for an old, dusty mirror. When Claire wiped the surface, she realized there was no reflection of her or Marcus, only a deep, almost liquid darkness that seemed to absorb the light. A shiver ran through her body. This was more than an illusion. Time seemed to have stood still. Each step inside that house was accompanied by small signs that something was watching them, and that not only was the mansion alive, but aware of their presence. Small objects moved when no one was looking. Whispers called out names intentionally, and shadows aligned strategically, as if guiding the group's destiny. While exploring the library, Damien found old records of the family that built the house, revealing macabre incidents that included disappearances and mysterious deaths. Each page read seemed to intensify the feeling that the mansion had its own memory, preserving past tragedies to repeat the cycle. The group began to realize that they were dealing with something much bigger than any true story or urban legend. The first attack happened in the basement. Heather, who had ventured out alone to find a way out, found a secret door that led her to an underground corridor. When she tried to return, she found the path blocked. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind her, but when she turned around, there was no one there. An intense cold enveloped her, and the feeling that she was being touched by invisible hands made her heart race. In the following minutes, the tension among the survivors increased. Small disagreements arose, fueled by fear and exhaustion, revealing each person's weaknesses. Marcus began to doubt his own sanity, questioning whether it was all just illusions brought on by a weary mind. Claire, on the other hand, maintained her determination, determined to document every detail, even when the terror seemed almost unbearable. Before the first night's closing, everyone gathered in the main room, only to realize that the front door had disappeared. Panic set in. They were trapped inside the house, and the feeling that every room was watching them became inescapable. The mansion, silent until then, now seemed to breathe with its own rhythm, echoing the secrets of its previous victims. And so, with 8 people trapped in a residence that seemed aware of their movements, the realistic narrative blended with inevitable terror. The mystery took hold, and the reader is plunged into an atmosphere of tension where every action, every choice could irrevocably seal their fate. The story was only beginning, and the feeling that something unexpected and terrifying awaited around every corner made it impossible to look away from the narrative. Greystone Mansion, built in the early 19th century, held more than just walls and old wood. It was a reliquary of Louisiana's history, a stage for turbulent times and secrets that should never have been revealed. Each corridor held fragments of bygone eras, from yellowed letters pinned under loose boards to portraits of ancestors with penetrating gazes who seemed to observe every step of the intruders. The Gothic architecture, with its towers and arched windows, served as a perfect frame for the atmosphere of suspense. As Claire examined the main hall, she noticed details that would go unnoticed by any ordinary visitor. She observed discreet inscriptions on the doorframe, written in Old French, reminiscent of the influence of the colonizers and their mysterious traditions. These details fueled her investigative instincts. Each symbol was a clue, each shadow could be a threat. The journalist felt that the story she was seeking was not just about recent deaths, but about a cycle of tragedies spanning generations. Marcus began exploring the attic, drawn to objects that seemed to resist the passage of time. Antique furniture, faded photographs, and boxes full of personal belongings revealed the routines of families who had lived there, but also disturbing clues, notes with undocumented death dates, references to unknown rituals, and letters mentioning visitors who never left. The architecture student's mind tried to rationalize each find, but the growing unease suggested that the mansion was not just an old building. It was almost a living organism reacting to their presence. Heather, with her historical knowledge, identified patterns in the objects and decor that pointed to local events that had been omitted from official records. Old documents reported disappearances of employees and residents of the region, often associated with parties and gatherings involving the local elite. For her, the mansion was not just a modern horror setting, but a historical time capsule that held secrets that had been buried along with the victims. Damien, attentive to every paranormal detail, found evidence of phenomena that defied rational explanation. Old tape recordings made by previous explorers showed sounds of footsteps, laughter, and whispers that had no human origin. For him, this confirmed the presence of something beyond the natural, but different from what was expected of an urban legend. It was real and concrete, each incident with tangible evidence. As the characters explored the mansion, their interactions deepened. Claire and Marcus formed an alliance based on the need for survival, but also on the instinct to uncover the truth. Heather showed caution, frequently warning against hasty decisions. Damien, in turn, became an authority figure in the group, guiding the others on the signs of danger. The remaining 5, initially united only by challenge and curiosity, began to show their own weaknesses. Fear, impatience, and distrust increased the tension. The external setting also reinforced the atmosphere of isolation and danger. The mansion was surrounded by a ruined courtyard, twisted trees, and a persistent fog that made it impossible to distinguish boundaries. Sounds of the local fauna, owls, Dogs in the distance, wind rustling through dead trees, mingled with the internal noises, creating an environment where every sound was interpreted as a threat. The dim lights of lanterns barely illuminated narrow corridors, while shadows cast by the old beams seemed to take on a life of their own. With each discovery, the characters became more aware that they weren't just exploring an old house. They were dealing with a historical, almost conscious presence that interacted with them in subtle but menacing ways. Personal tensions surfaced more frequently. Claire questioned Marcus's decisions, Heather reprimanded others for their recklessness, and Damien tried to maintain order. Each internal conflict reflected the psychological impact of the house on their minds and bodies. As the night wore on, the feeling that something larger and older was watching them intensified. Objects shifted, doors opened onto different corridors, and whispers drifted along the walls as if the house's own history were trying to communicate something. The mansion was not merely a setting. It was a living character, a silent antagonist, shaping the narrative based on the group's actions and decisions. As the characters explored the rooms on the upper floor more thoroughly, they began to notice patterns that linked their personal histories to past tragedies. Small details, such as markings similar to those in an old diary or repeated phrases in paintings, suggested that each person's fate was somehow intertwined with the cycle of previous deaths. The sense of urgency grew. Time was not on their side, and the mansion seemed to accelerate the tension with each passing hour. The air inside the mansion seemed thicker with each passing hour. The tension among the eight was rising, not only from growing fear, but from disagreements about how to act in the face of the unknown. Claire insisted on documenting every detail, while Marcus argued that they should focus on finding a way out before the situation worsened. Heather remained skeptical, distrusting any supernatural explanation, while Damien watched cautiously, analyzing every sign and behavior as evidence of something out of the ordinary. The first major conflict arose when one of the rooms revealed a disturbing secret. A hidden door behind a bookcase led to a tiny compartment filled with personal belongings of the mansion's previous victims. Upon entering, they discovered letters, photographs, and diaries describing the missing people's final days. Fear, paranoia, and the certainty that they wouldn't leave alive. As they tried to retrieve the objects, the walls trembled slightly, as if the mansion were reacting to their intrusion. The shock caused panic among the group. Some wanted to flee immediately, others wished to continue investigating. This division exacerbated rivalries and revealed emotional weaknesses. One member, unable to withstand the pressure, began to despair, questioning everyone's sanity and accusing the others of leading him to certain death. Heather tried to calm him down, but her words only increased his despair, showing how fear amplified internal and external conflicts. Damien, in turn, suggested using logic and organization to navigate the mansion's corridors, but the resistance of some prevented the plan from being effective. As they tried to reorganize themselves, the mansion seemed to change. Corridors that had previously led to specific rooms now stretched in impossible directions. Doors that had been locked were open, and objects mysteriously disappeared. It was as if the house were alive, manipulating perception and increasing the feeling of disorientation. Every step became a gamble. A mistake could be costly. One of the most critical moments occurred in the abandoned ballroom. A large mirror reflected not only those present, but fleeting images of people who weren't there, the mansion's former occupants. The whispers grew louder, and translucent figures began to appear on the walls. The group realized that the mansion was not only watching them, but actively interfering with their emotions, exploiting personal fears and memories. Each person's internal conflict intensified. Claire questioned her own courage, Marcus struggled with the feeling of losing control, and Heather tried to maintain rationality in the face of impossible evidence. Beyond the internal tensions, real physical obstacles arose. The unstable upper floor began to give way at strategic points. Marcus almost fell through an open crack in the floor and was saved only by Damien, who acted quickly. This incident served as a warning. The mansion was not just a setting for psychological terror, but an active trap. Every action had immediate consequences, and the characters needed to learn to react quickly under pressure. The first subtle deaths occurred indirectly, accidents caused by the mansion itself and by the fear that paralyzed the most vulnerable. A bookcase fell on one of the participants, causing serious injuries. Another tripped on broken steps and momentarily disappeared from the group, returning only after moments of intense disorientation. Each event increased the paranoia and caused alliances to form and dissolve rapidly. Damien, studying the pattern of deaths and accidents, began to notice something disturbing. The mansion seemed to select its victims, testing their resilience, courage, and sanity. Those who were more confident or curious survived longer, while the fearful were the first to suffer the consequences. This discovery increased the tension among the remaining members, as everyone began to measure themselves against each other, trying to control not only their fear, but also the mansion's perception of each one of them. Communication between them also deteriorated. Small arguments turned into more intense fights, and distrust grew. Claire began to suspect Marcus, questioning his intentions, while Heather distrusted Damien, believing he might be manipulating the group. The physical and psychological isolation imposed by the house amplified these conflicts, making every decision critical for everyone's survival. At the height of this development, the group found an old diary, apparently belonging to one of the mansion's founders. The pages detailed a dark pact. Any intruder who penetrated deep into the residence would be at the mercy of unseen forces tested for courage, intelligence, and resilience. This document confirmed what Damien already suspected. The mansion had its own mechanism for judgment and punishment. The conflict reached its peak when the panicked group decided to split up to explore different routes in an attempt to find a way out. This decision had immediate consequences. Some became trapped in shape-shifting corridors. Others encountered subtle traps that nearly cost them their lives. The chaos revealed that the greatest enemy was not just the mansion, but also their inability to trust each other and maintain rationality amidst the terror. As the night wore on, the mansion seemed to grow in complexity, almost as if each corridor and room was designed to explore not only fear, but also the deepest secrets of each individual. Claire, though determined to document everything, began to realize that her colleagues were hiding more than simple apprehension. They all carried weaknesses that the house seemed to know and manipulate. A subplot emerged involving Marcus and Claire. During an attempt to escape through a narrow corridor, Marcus confided that his obsession with ancient architecture stemmed from a family trauma. His sister had mysteriously disappeared years ago, and he believed that certain places could hold memories of lost people. Claire realized that her own desire to reveal the mansion's history was not merely professional, but an attempt to prove courage in the face of her own insecurity. This internal tension added depth to their relationship, creating an alliance based not only on survival, but on a mutual understanding of personal traumas. Heather, on the other hand, began to isolate herself, noticing historical patterns that the others ignored. She found a mural hidden beneath layers of peeling paint depicting figures with ancient masks, each associated with symbols that recurred in the diaries of previous victims. The history professor began to see a connection between past disappearances and the group's current fears, suggesting that the mansion not only reacted to intruders, but recreated ancient patterns of violence and paranoia. Damien became a focal point of tension. His ability to analyze supernatural phenomena was, paradoxically, a source of conflict. While he saw patterns and signs, other members of the group began to doubt his interpretation, questioning whether he was exaggerating or even manipulating the situation for his own benefit. This psychological conflict added a layer of emotional pressure, making each decision more difficult and increasing the group's instability. Meanwhile, the remaining five, initially united by curiosity and the promise of financial reward, began to show unexpected facets of their personalities. One of them, who seemed calm, revealed aggressive tendencies when confronted with fear. Another, previously cynical and rational, began to deliriously talk to himself and interpret shadows as real threats. These micro-plots created constant tension, showing how the hostile environment affected different personalities in unique ways. The pressure of time became evident through subtle signs. The mansion's old clock, stopped for decades, began to tick intermittently, marking hours that seemed not to correspond with the outside world. Small, synchronized events, such as doors slamming at precise intervals or whispers coinciding with heartbeats, reinforced the sense of urgency. The group began to realize that every movement needed to be calculated and that procrastination could cost lives. An additional subplot involved the growing rivalry between Claire and Heather. Both sought leadership within the group, but in different ways. Claire tried to impose rationality and courage, while Heather resorted to historical knowledge and pattern analysis. The tension between them resulted in heated debates about which path to take, increasing the risk of rash decisions. This dynamic added a layer of internal conflict that mirrored the external terror imposed by the mansion. Another complex element emerged when Marcus found an ancient mechanism hidden beneath the attic floor, seemingly linked to traps or secret passages. This discovery heightened the anxiety. The group now had to decide whether to explore this uncertain path or remain in the familiar areas. Each choice had immediate consequences, reinforcing the feeling that the mansion punished or rewarded certain behaviors, testing courage, trust, and intelligence. As the characters navigated through corridors, rooms, and attics, the narrative alternated between different perspectives, showing not only the shared fear but also individual strategies and the struggle for survival. Small, disorienting events, such as doors leading to different rooms or shadows that seemed to anticipate their movements, created a sense of controlled chaos where each subplot fueled the central tension of the story. The climax of this complex section occurs when a clash of interests leads to a critical choice: split into smaller groups to explore the mansion more quickly, or remain together, risking being caught in traps that the house seemed to deliberately create. This decision, made under extreme stress, triggers immediate consequences and sets the tone for the approaching turning point, making it clear that the environment and internal conflicts are inseparable, and that the mansion is not merely a setting, but an active antagonist capable of manipulating emotions, decisions, and destinies. The mansion clock struck midnight. An absolute silence filled the corridors, as if Greystone itself were breathing with anticipation. Until then, the scares and accidents seemed like random responses to the group's presence. Now, something greater was manifesting itself, and each character felt viscerally that their choices up to that moment had led to an inevitable precipice. Claire was in the library, examining old letters from missing residents, when she realized that some pages were no longer there. Manuscripts that had been in front of her minutes before had now disappeared or changed position, revealing phrases that were previously hidden. They cannot escape, and the chosen ones will be remembered. The terror intensified as she understood that the mansion not only reacted, but also communicated, imposing invisible and rigid rules. Meanwhile, Marcus and Damien explored the attic and found a secret hatch leading to a hidden underground room. Inside, old portraits of former residents merged with current photos of the group, as if the mansion had recorded their every move since their first step. Marcus gasped in shock. The past and present intertwined, and each person there was now included in the cycle of tragedies that had been repeating itself for decades. The real turning point came when Heather, attempting to access a side passage, was confronted by a vision. A translucent figure, identical to herself, pointed to a sealed door. Upon touching the figure, Heather felt a surge of memories that weren't her own. Recollections of previous victims, their hopes, fears, and despair. She realized that the mansion manipulated not only space, but also the mind, connecting the experiences of the dead and the living within the same temporal stream. As the whispers grew louder and shadows danced across the walls, the group began to understand that the mansion was actively selecting those who would survive, creating scenarios to test their choices. The first major revelation shook Claire. Damien not only studied the phenomena, he already knew certain local legends in details that no ordinary tourist would know. What initially seemed like expertise turned suspicious. He might have been intentionally drawn to the mansion, perhaps with a purpose of his own. Shock spread through the group as the corridors began to rearrange themselves, closing known routes and opening new passages that seemed directed at specific individuals. Claire realized that every previous decision had been observed and manipulated, that moments of courage or hesitation had directly influenced subsequent events. The mansion, silent until then, was now an active protagonist, capable of punishing and rewarding with almost cruel precision. The turning point occurred in the main hall. Flickering lights revealed something impossible. The 8 previous victims, represented by ethereal figures, emerged from the floor, repeating actions that reflected their last hours of life. A sense of déjà vu overwhelmed the group. Each of their movements echoed the past. The mansion not only imprisoned them physically, it created temporal and psychological loops, forcing each character to confront the inevitability of their choices. Marcus, in a panic, tried to escape, but found himself trapped in an endless corridor, its distorted walls and ceilings creating an illusion of interminable space. Damien, in contrast, remained calm and guided Heather to a door that seemed like an exit, but Claire realized that each route opened had been chosen to test courage, confidence, and reasoning. The group began to understand that the only way to survive was to anticipate the mansion's patterns and learn to play by the invisible rules it imposed. The turning point also revealed a cruel secret. Among them was someone who wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure. The mansion seemed to identify individual weaknesses, exploiting personal fears and traumas. The first real death, planned by the very structure of the house, occurred unexpectedly. One of the group members was crushed by a bookcase that moved for no apparent reason. Shock and disbelief overwhelmed the survivors, making it clear that no behavior could be considered safe. At that moment, Claire understood that her own determination to document the story had put everyone at risk. Curiosity, so necessary for the investigation, had become the mansion's weapon against them. The emotional tension reached extreme levels. Trust, fear, despair, and guilt mingled, and every future action would require meticulous calculation. With this revelation, the narrative changes completely. It's not just about escaping, but about understanding and interacting with an intelligent and historical entity capable of manipulating space, time, and perception. The story, which previously seemed linear, becomes multi-layered, and each character must confront not only the mansion, but themselves, in a battle that combines strategy, courage, and sanity. The first death had shattered any remaining sense of security. The body of the group member, crushed by the bookcase that seemed to move on its own, lay on the floor, deformed and unrecognizable. The initial shock gave way to a profound fear. Every step, every choice could be fatal. The mansion, silent and relentless, watched and manipulated, making it impossible to know which corridor was safe or which door led to a deadly fate. Claire felt the weight of guilt, Her insistence on documenting every detail had led everyone to stay longer than they should have. Each photograph, each note now seemed to record not just events, but tragedies. She realized that professional curiosity, which had once seemed a virtue, had become a trap. Emotional responsibility began to erode her ability to make quick decisions, creating tension between her and Marcus, who accused Claire of being reckless. Marcus, on the other hand, was grappling with anger and frustration. His attempts to lead strategic decisions had been constantly challenged, and now he felt the mansion was playing on human failings. He began to realize that, in addition to the fear of death, he would need to control the group, balancing rationality and courage. Each attempt to guide the others was met with resistance or distrust, amplifying the internal and external conflict. Heather reacted with a mixture of horror and intellectual fascination. The history professor analyzed patterns in the deaths and events, trying to find logic within the chaos. However, each historical discovery brought more psychological pressure. The mansion tested not only courage, but also intelligence and perception. Heather began to suffer from mental exhaustion, struggling to maintain her sanity while interpreting symbols, inscriptions, and events that seemed to alter reality itself. Damien, who until then had seemed calm and composed, began to be viewed with suspicion. His previous interpretations of local legends now seemed overly strategic, almost manipulative. The others began to wonder if he knew the risks beforehand, or if he had been part of some larger plan. This suspicion shook the group's cohesion, creating divisions that the mansion seemed to exploit with precision, reinforcing the atmosphere of paranoia and distrust. The physical environment of the mansion became even more hostile. Corridors lengthened and contracted, doors led to unexpected places, and ancient whispers intensified, now accompanied by slight shifts of objects that amplified the panic. The perception of time and space became relative, and the group began to question whether any path truly led to the exit, or if each attempt was merely a test by the house. The emotional consequences were immediate. Small arguments turned into open fights, previously solid alliances broke down, and trust among the survivors began to crumble. Claire and Marcus, once allies, started arguing about the best course of action. Heather preferred to work alone, interpreting signs and clues. Damien tried to maintain some control, but the pressure heightened the feeling that any wrong move could cost more lives. The group also began to notice patterns in the mansion's behavior. Certain decisions resulted in temporary safety, while others led to deadly traps. This created constant tension, as every action had to be carefully planned. It was a race against time, but also against their own fear and against the mansion's psychological manipulation. Beyond the internal tensions, the physical consequences of the initial deaths were clear. Minor injuries became serious due to lack of care, less serious accidents increased the risk, and collective anxiety amplified the danger, making every movement more risky. The group needed to balance survival, strategy, and understanding of the hostile environment, without allowing panic to become lethal. At the end of this stage, the characters understood that they could no longer act impulsively. Each step required calculation, courage, and collaboration, albeit tense. The mansion, as the antagonist, consolidated its influence, manipulating not only space and time, but also emotions and human relationships. The internal and external conflict now intertwined critically, preparing the ground for the next phase, the overcoming and individual growth of each character, where skills, courage, and intelligence would be tested to the limit. The death of the group's first member and the terrifying events at the mansion left everyone in shock, but paradoxically, they also awakened previously dormant forces. Claire, accustomed to documenting stories objectively, began to realize that her curiosity needed to be balanced with strategy. She began to carefully analyze each corridor, each shadow, noting patterns that could help them survive. Her evolution lay not only in courage, but in her ability to transform fear into information, becoming an unlikely guide for the group. Marcus, once impulsive and focused solely on structural logic, learned to observe subtle signs: the movement of curtains, the creaking of floorboards, the metallic smell that indicated the proximity of traps. His experience in ancient architecture became a vital tool for deciphering the manipulation of the mansion. By realizing that the house's structure reacted to their behavior, Marcus developed a strategy to predict changes in the corridors, helping to create temporary escape routes. Heather, immersed in historical analysis, also grew significantly. Initially withdrawn and distrustful, she began to share her findings assertively, guiding the group towards rooms that seemed safer or that contained clues about the mansion's deadly patterns. She understood that her knowledge was not merely academic, but crucial for survival, and she began to balance rationality with intuition, managing to anticipate the house's behavior and avoid traps before they happened. Damien, the paranormal investigator, began to trust others more and coordinate actions collaboratively. Before, his decisions were individual, based on personal observation and experience, but the extreme pressure taught him that only cooperation could increase the chances of survival. His leadership became strategic, but also emotional, encouraging the group to overcome panic and distrust to act as a cohesive unit. The remaining 5, who initially displayed fear and disorganization, also underwent transformations. Some began to directly confront their own weaknesses. Anxiety became focus, impulsivity turned into quick thinking, and courage emerged where despair once lay. Each survivor found a way to adapt, learning to use fear as a warning, not as paralysis. The mansion, which had previously seemed to control every movement, began to be read by the group. They perceived patterns. Certain sounds announced the movement of objects, changes in temperature indicated the proximity of hidden passages, and shadows projected on the walls suggested safe or dangerous routes. This understanding gave the characters a partial advantage, allowing them to react proactively instead of just defensively. Cooperation became essential. Claire and Marcus combined structural observations and pattern recognition, Heather interpreted historical signs, and Damien coordinated strategic movements. Small groups moved with precision, avoiding traps and ensuring no one was left isolated. Each action reflected growth, courage, intelligence, and empathy became tools for survival. The greatest challenge came when a previously safe passage proved treacherous. A leaning staircase partially collapsed, threatening to crush the survivors. Marcus had to improvise quickly, using beams and loose planks to create an escape route. Claire led the evacuation, ensuring no one was left behind. Heather deciphered symbols near the staircase that warned of instability, while Damien helped the most injured. This episode solidified the group's transformation. The mansion was still dangerous, but they now possessed the skills to face terror with strategy and courage. Beyond physical skills, there was emotional growth. Guilt, fear, and anger were transformed into motivation. Each survivor began to understand that the mansion tested not only practical skills, but also psychological strength. Those who succumbed to despair became more vulnerable, while those who channeled emotions into action learned to partially master the manipulation of the house. The overcoming of obstacles culminates when, after hours of observation and small victories, the group notices a pattern that suggests a potential way out. The lessons learned, cooperation, perception, courage, and strategy, demonstrate how each character has tangibly evolved. None of them are the same as when they entered the mansion hours before. Each trauma, each fear faced, has contributed to their transformation, preparing them for the final challenges that still await in the climax. The group, now tenuously united, advanced through the mansion's corridors with precision and caution. Every movement was calculated. Every decision had immediate consequences. The lessons of the last few hours had transformed fear into strategic vigilance, but the tension remained. The mansion, aware of the intruder's evolution, seemed to constantly adjust, creating ever more elaborate traps and illusions. Claire observed patterns on the walls. Markings that had previously gone unnoticed now indicated rooms that might offer clues to a safe exit. She shared her findings with Marcus and Heather, forming a small survival council that coordinated every action. The journalist, once impulsive, now exercised leadership based on analysis and accumulated experience, becoming a central figure in preparing for the final confrontation. While exploring the upper floor, they discovered that the mansion still had unknown passages. Doors that had previously been locked were open, revealing narrow corridors and staircases that snaked like labyrinths. Each passage seemed to test not only courage, but also reasoning and mutual trust. Marcus led the group, using his architectural expertise to anticipate instabilities, while Damien observed paranormal signs, anticipating dangerous movements and subtle traps. Guided by the historical symbols she had deciphered, Heather began to perceive a pattern suggesting a central point in the mansion, possibly responsible for manipulating the space and events. The feeling that everyone was converging on this epicenter heightened the tension. Any mistake could be fatal. This realization solidified the need for collaboration and absolute attention, reinforcing the individual growth of each character. Small victories and losses continued to occur. A seemingly safe corridor revealed an unstable floor, causing minor injuries to one of the survivors. Another set of doors led to a room with clear signs of past events, records of previous deaths and inscriptions suggesting chosen ones and losers. Each discovery increased the psychological pressure, reminding everyone that the mansion tested not only skills, but also emotional manipulation and trust. The isolation and manipulation of the mansion strengthened the group's resolve. Claire, Marcus, and Heather began establishing silent signals and quick codes to communicate imminent dangers. Damien, observing the house's behavior, identified temporal patterns. Certain sounds and movements coincided with changes in the layout of the hallways and objects. The group realized they could use these signals to their advantage, creating a strategic advantage even in the face of the hostile environment. Beyond physical preparation, each character faced internal conflicts. Claire needed to balance leadership and caution. Marcus struggled with the anxiety of leading under pressure. Heather fought against the fear of failing to interpret signals. Damien confronted the growing suspicion of others and the need for mutual trust. These emotional challenges were part of the preparation for the climax, as only the complete integration of skills and trust between them could allow for survival and success. Minor subplots were also partially resolved. The rivalry between Claire and Heather diminished, transforming into efficient collaboration. The remaining 5, previously chaotic, learned to trust leadership instructions and historical and structural clues. Communication and respect for each other's abilities became fundamental. Each character understood that success depended on strategic collaboration, courage, and the rational use of acquired knowledge. The tension reached its peak when they arrived at a large double door in the center of the mansion, seemingly sealed for decades. Heather pointed out ancient symbols that suggested this was the main room of the house's cycle, where hidden forces and past events converged. The mansion now seemed to focus its attention on the group's every move, as if it sensed that its intruders had evolved. Every corridor, every shadow, every sound indicated that the final confrontation was near. At that moment, the survivors consolidated their roles. Claire as strategist and documenter, Marcus as observer and structural decipherer, Heather as historical interpreter, Damien as guide to paranormal patterns, and the others, now more confident, as coordinated executors. The group understood that every action would be decisive, that the mansion could still manipulate them, but that unity and acquired skill could turn the tide. The build-up to the climax ended with a collective decision to advance together to the central door, using all the accumulated knowledge to confront the core of the mansion, face its horrors, and uncover the truth about the cycle of deaths and disappearances that had haunted Greystone for decades. The psychological and physical tension reached its peak. Each character knew that from then on, nothing would be predictable, and that only courage, strategy, and collaboration could determine who would survive. The double doors in the center of the mansion creaked as the group pushed them open, revealing a large, almost cathedral-like room, illuminated only by a spectral light that seemed to emanate from the ceiling itself. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of mold and iron. In the center, an ancient altar of black wood displayed objects belonging to all the previous victims, yellowed photographs, letters, clothing, and small belongings, all meticulously arranged. Every detail pulsed with the presence of the mansion, as if aware of what was happening. As soon as the group stepped forward, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. An uncanny chill ran down each of their spines, and shadows began to contort on the walls, taking on human forms that mimicked their movements. It was the mansion revealing its ultimate power, a labyrinth of illusions and apparitions, capable of manipulating space, time, and perception simultaneously. Claire realized immediately that recording every detail was no longer enough. Every action was a matter of life or death. She led the group with determination, avoiding looking directly at the shadows, trusting the signs they had learned to interpret. Marcus used his knowledge of architecture to identify unstable points in the floor and illusory corridors, guiding the group along routes that seemed real but were safer. Heather, interpreting ancient symbols engraved on the altar and walls, understood that the mansion was not merely physical, but ritualistic. Each object represented past lives, and the central room functioned as the energy core that kept the cycle of deaths active. The revelation shocked everyone. To escape, they would need to interact with the objects in a specific way, demonstrating courage, respect, and understanding of the house's past. As they attempted to manipulate the altar, the shadows grew more aggressive, reflecting deep-seated fears. Claire saw reflections of her past mistakes. Marcus was confronted with memories of his missing sister. Heather faced visions of historical failures they could never correct. And Damien realized that the group's distrust could now cost them their lives. Each character had to contend with personal illusions while physically attempting to position the objects correctly on the altar. The most tense moment occurred when a seemingly safe corridor collapsed, and one of the ethereal figures of the previous victims advanced toward the group. The combination of fear, quick thinking, and strategy became crucial. Marcus held onto a beam to prevent the corridor from collapsing. Claire pushed the last object onto the altar at the precise moment. Heather recited the ancient words she had deciphered in the symbols. Damien kept the others focused, preventing panic from overwhelming their actions. In the final instant, the mansion seemed to react with full force, walls trembling and shadows multiplying, but the correct alignment of objects and the group's collective courage created a rupture in the energy core. An intense glow filled the room, temporarily blinding the vision. Time seemed to stop for a moment, and the group felt as if they were being weighed, each life weighed on the mansion's scales. As the light faded, the shadows disappeared. The altar became just an old wooden piece of furniture, and the double doors slowly opened, finally revealing the exit. Silence filled the room. The survivors, exhausted and wounded, understood that they had broken the cycle of death and illusions within the mansion, but not without scars, physical, emotional, and psychological. The climax also brought a final twist. Damien, who previously seemed suspicious and manipulative, revealed that he had studied the mansion not out of personal curiosity, but to save others from similar events. His leadership, initially questioned, became indispensable, showing that alliances and trust, even in terrifying environments, could save lives. Each character emerged transformed. Claire, from a curious journalist to a strategic leader, Marcus, from impulsive to calculating and courageous, Heather, from a rational loner to a reliable and collaborative interpreter, Damien, from a solitary observer to an essential guide, and the others, from disorganized survivors to group members capable of facing supernatural horrors with precision and courage. The climax not only resolved the central conflict, Greystone Manor as the active antagonist, but also solidified the characters' growth arcs. The terror, illusions and traps of the house were overcome through courage, strategy, collaboration, and understanding of the past, proving that even in seemingly hopeless situations, evolution and unity can be crucial for survival. As they left the room, the group realized that the mansion remained silent, imposing yet powerless before those who had learned to decipher its patterns and confront their fears. The cycle of deaths was interrupted, making it clear that the mansion's true power lay in the manipulation of fear, but that human control over courage and intelligence could prevail. As they crossed the threshold of Greystone Manor, the first light of dawn illuminated the exterior of the old property. The cool morning air brought relief, but also a profound awareness of what they had lived through. Each survivor carried wounds, some visible, others etched into their minds and souls, and the sense of terror that had haunted them for hours still echoed in every step. Claire, who had previously been driven by curiosity, now understood the importance of a balance between courage and caution. She realized that recording history meant not only capturing facts, but also respecting the danger they entailed. Marcus, in turn, reflected on the responsibility of leadership. His transformation from impulsive to strategic showed that courage and intelligence could coexist even in extreme situations. Heather, who had entered as a cautious observer, left as someone capable of interpreting complex signs and guiding others in critical decisions, recognizing that the union of historical knowledge and rational observation was vital to facing the unknown. Damien, whose loyalty and experience had been questioned, established himself as a guide and protector, proving that trust, even in an environment of manipulation, could be decisive for survival. The group still regarded each other with restrained distrust, aware that the trials had exposed weaknesses, fears, and rivalries. But mutual respect had grown, as had the understanding that each individual had played a crucial role in overcoming the challenges of the mansion. The lessons learned about courage, strategy, and collaboration had profoundly transformed each of them, preparing them to face future challenges with greater resilience. The mansion, now silent, seemed inert, but its legacy remained, a reminder that fear can be manipulated, that choices and actions have real consequences, and that hostile environments can reveal human strength and weaknesses. The cycle of deaths and disappearances had been interrupted, but the story of Greystone would continue to exist as a warning, etched in the memories of the survivors. As they walked away from the property, the group felt that something had changed within each of them. It wasn't just physical survival that mattered, but an inner transformation, an understanding of the value of courage, cooperation, and intelligence in the face of absolute danger. Each step towards the main road symbolized not only escape, but also the beginning of an emotional and psychological rebirth. Dawn brought warmth, colors, and sounds of the real world, contrasting sharply with the terror they had experienced. Although fear was still present, it was now filtered through the experience gained, the certainty that they had faced and overcome a force that seemed invincible. Each survivor, marked by the experience, carried with them not only memories of terror, but also proof that even in the face of the supernatural and the unknown, human determination can prevail. Months later, Claire published her article about Greystone Manor, carefully omitting details that might attract unsuspecting onlookers. Marcus resumed his career, now with a deeper understanding of hidden structures and secrets. Heather began studying historical phenomena with a focus on preventing similar tragedies, while Damien started guiding groups on the safe exploration of supernatural locations. Despite being physically distant, they all shared a silent memory. Greystone remained in their memories, and the feeling that the house watched their every move, even from afar, would never leave them. If you get chills from mystery and horror stories, share this Greystone experience with friends and family, but beware, they might feel the chill of the mansion's corridors too. Comment below which character you would have been and how you would have faced the supernatural challenges of the house. Subscribe to follow new horror and mystery stories, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any hidden secrets. And tell us where you're watching from. Would you face Greystone Mansion alone or with a brave group by your side?